Dave, I think looking at what we discussed earlier, maybe we also want to talk a little bit more about how the U.S. House of Representatives is talking about this in general and how they talk about the Biosecure Act that just passed. Something that you want to chip in about that?
Yeah. Like I said before, I think policymakers are really wising up to supply chains. COVID had a big play in that as well. Sometimes I remember I had a go bag that I brought out recently and had some old Army medical issued medical stuff like nasal pharyngeal and some combat gauze and stuff. I started looking at it, it's all made in China. So I think that's a huge vulnerability. It's not just the biotech itself, but actual medical equipment. If the balloon goes up and we have to shift those supply chains quickly. But that's Congress is looking at that, and I think they're looking at all of it, every aspect of it. And the Biosecure Act was one of the a big display of that. And just some nuance here, as because this is rare bipartisanship in Congress, is that the Biosecure Act passed the House on suspension of the rules, which means that they'll bypass the rules for both sides, both parties to debate. It passed 306 to 81. Not many things are bipartisan these days. And there's a Senate companion. So, Jack, you said, it's probably going to pass next year after this, whatever happens in November. Um, but I don't think this is the end of it. And in fact, the bill gives, let me find this, the director of the Office of Management 365 days to name other countries of concern. And so, Jackie, you were talking about networks. Who's the biggest perpetrator here? Like, who's the biggest? We
Yeah,
talk
so
a lot
it's
about China, but
we talk a lot about China, but the State Department cites Russia and North Korea have biological weapons programs, and Russia's goes back. I mean, we have direct information on how robust their programs were. So we talk a lot about about China, and you're right in the supply sense, right? Like we have to decouple just for a national security perspective, and I think private sector that's disruptive. They say it'll fall back on the customer in terms of a price point, any price increases, but really like from a national security standpoint, we can't be overly reliant on the manufacturing hubs and the supply chains running through and being controlled by China. And we know through their initiative, we know through Made in China 2025 that like BioTech is among their named initiatives. So important to disrupt that. But going back to additional actors, I mean, Russia, they don't have as much control over supply chain. Maybe that's what drives it. But there's other areas that I think Russia and its partners, we have to examine closely. Like we got to look at Iran and what they've been doing. We know that there's been exfiltration of that justice has indicted for people, sending out whether it was IP or actual material to Iran. So those are just some of the big ones. But I think an important thing when it comes to biological weapons is non-state actors, and that's kind of the tricky thing when it comes to biodefense, right? Is attribution, and how do you tie if there were to be a biological threat deployed against any population, and we're seeing now that it's feasible to say that you could do a targeted attack. How do you attribute it? And do we have the technology to say, from bioforensics or biosurveillance standpoint, to say that we can truly attribute this to any actor, really? Like whether it's the guy in the garage down the road or if it's, a massive lab operation in China. And I don't know, I think that's something that's a gap that the government needs to lean into to identify that. But then that's a great starting point in terms of what does our threat profile look like for this stuff? And it's multifaceted. It's biodefenses, it's economic strategy, but it's also, the true risk of the militarized use of weaponized technology.